Thank you. That's a lot to think about. Next up, we have Emily. Emily is a software developer at Flow, and she has a background in psychology. She's fascinated by how the mind works, and she's going to tell us how to remember everything.
Hi, hello. Hi, so I'm here to talk about remembering things, but I'm actually really bad at doing that. So I thought today's event was happening on Wednesday, for example. But there are some people who are really good at remembering things, like Sherlock Holmes. So he's a character who seems like he's able to remember the finest details. And the BBC version of Sherlock uses this technique called the Mind Palace to remember a lot of information. And even though Sherlock is fictional, the Mind Palace is a real thing, so that's what I would like to talk about today. It's also called the Memory Palace, and it's a technique that uses visual and spatial memory to store and recall information. And the history dates back to ancient Greece, where there was a poet named Simonides. He was at a banquet, and tragically, the banquet hall collapsed, killing everyone inside. Simonides was outside, he was fine, but everyone who died, their bodies were so disfigured, they were beyond recognition. But Simonides realized then that if he closed his eyes, he could see where each person was sitting in the banquet hall in his mind, and that way he was able to remember who sat where, identify the bodies, and everyone got a proper burial. And that seems really cool that he was able to do that, but it's actually something that we are also capable of doing. So if I asked you right now to think of all the people that you work with at your office and list them, you might have a hard time, you might forget some people, and it's not the easiest task. But on the other hand, if you imagine what your office looked like, where you sit, who sits beside you, who sits beside them, and go around your office in your mind like that, you'll find that it's a lot easier to know who sits where and list all the people. So that is basically how the Mind Palace works. It is visualizing a place and remembering what belongs where to recall information. And in the office example, we're using things that already exist in the office, your colleagues, but let's go through how to build your own palace, which will involve placing new information. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to think of a place that is real, that you're very familiar with, that actually exists, and that is going to be your mind palace. So for example, your home or your childhood home, those would be good things. Somewhere where you can imagine the outside of, you can imagine the inside, you can imagine yourself walking through it. That is going to be your memory palace, and the next step is to actually walk through it in your mind. And what you're going to do is you're going to figure out a route that you're going to take, and you're going to have numbers for each of the kind of individual places that you're going to go through in your palace. Like the door can be number 1, the hallway number 2. And this is important because later when it comes to recalling the information, you're going to remember the information in the order that you labeled these. These are going to be where you're going to place the items. So in each of these spaces, like number 4, which is a kitchen, you can have like sub-places. Any kind of independent place that you can imagine, like the stove or the sink, those can be hooks. And it's called hooks because you're going to be hanging what you want to remember onto it. Which takes us to step 3, placing the item. So let's say that our first hook is our front door, and we want to remember a grocery list. First item is eggs. So what you're going to first do is you're going to think about your door, and you're going to visualize it in your mind, and you're going to visualize having eggs there. And the trick here is not to just remember like a boring carton of eggs, because that's not really memorable, but you want to make it really weird and interesting and bizarre. So it's going to trigger like an emotional reaction, like a group of Humpty Dumpty eggs swarming your door, something like that. It still screams eggs, but it's a lot more memorable than just a carton of eggs floating on your door. So that is our first hook. And let's proceed to go inside. Our second hook is the door, or the hallway, I guess, when you open the door. Again, if our second item is coffee, you don't want to just think of like a boring can of coffee there, but imagine something memorable, like you open the door and you have coffee spilling in and coffee beans like scattered everywhere. Think of the smell of the coffee, the texture of the coffee beans, And again, bizarre, weird, easy to visualize, detailed, that's what's good. And that's basically what you're going to keep doing in each of the routes. And later when it comes to recalling the information, you're just going to, in your mind, walk through your palace, and you're going to see the front door in your mind, and you're going to see Humpty Dumpty. You're going to open the door, and you're going to see coffee spilling out. And that is how you build your mind palace. And so, like any skill, it is a learned skill, and it does require a lot of practice. So I'll work on it, and maybe you'd like to work on it, and hopefully we can memorize things like Sherlock Holmes does. Thank you.